Last season, when throughout the year the Memphis Grizzlies thought that they were one of the greatest teams in the league, they had the league wrapped around their finger, talking trash on the court, off the court, Morant saying he was fine in the West, a young up-and-coming team that was electric on the court with Ja's insane highlight reels combined with the Grizzlies' defensive tenacity. They were a very talented team, and they thought they were God's gift to the basketball world, until all of that came crashing down when they were under the brightest lights of the NBA playoffs and going up against one of the older teams in the NBA, the LA Lakers. The Grizzlies, despite being the number 2 seed, despite having home court advantage, got absolutely embarrassed in the first round series, losing in 6 games, and getting obliterated in the final game of that series, losing to the Lakers by 40 points, one of the worst losses in NBA playoff history. And so despite the Grizzlies' regular season success that they've had over the past 2 seasons, they knew they needed to make changes, because at their core, despite having great young talent, they were a very immature and devoid of leadership team, which is critical when it comes to having any kind of playoff success. And changing the culture and leadership of this organization couldn't have been even more apparent when Morant, after already being suspended for flashing a gun on Instagram, decided to do it yet again after the Grizzlies were already eliminated from the playoffs, which of course led to a subsequent suspension of 25 games to start the upcoming season, which Morant is still currently serving. So for the Grizzlies, they knew they had to do something, because as talented as they were, having one of the greatest young athletes in the league, a superstar player, with the core that they had, they weren't going to be winning any championships or even making deep playoff runs for that matter without changing the culture of this group. They needed leadership, they needed toughness, players who are no-nonsense, hard-working guys and will whip younger players into shape. And of course, also getting rid of their bad apples who kept putting a target on their back, meaning Dillon Brooks, which they made abundantly clear at the end of the season that under no circumstances he would be returning to the team. And so for the Grizzlies, in their view, the way to change the culture, the way to create some leadership, experience, a winning player, a winning mentality, was to bring in the heart and soul of the Boston Celtics and former Defensive Player of the Year winner in Marcus Smart. And while on the surface, this seemed like a great idea because he would more than make up for the lost defense of Dillon Brooks, but he may even elevate their offensive game and hold down the fort and remain competitive while they wait for Morant to serve a suspension. But so far, this has not been the case at all. And in fact, you could argue Smart has actually been worse for the Grizzlies than Dillon Brooks ever was. And it's why this could very well go down as one of the Grizzlies' biggest regrets of the offseason, and it's what we'll be talking about further in this video. Of course, if you're new to the channel and you like this type of content, it would mean a great deal to me if you subscribed, and in return I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Now, when the Celtics first made this trade to move Marcus Smart, which would effectively land them Kristaps Porzingis and 2 first-round picks between what they received from the Grizzlies and the Wizards, there was skepticism around the Celtics trading away one of their most important and impactful players in Marcus Smart. Like, most agree that the return that they got for him was incredible. 2 first-round picks alone for Smart is high value, no question. But at the same time, you cannot underestimate letting one of your most valuable glue guys go. The energizer of the team, the heart and soul, your best defender, to have that disrupt the team chemistry, the cohesion on that Celtics team that they have been building for so many years was questionable in terms of how that was going to impact the trajectory for them going forward. And as I mentioned, for the Grizzlies, this was seen as a wise move because they needed a no-nonsense player like Marcus Smart, one who is going to give 100% effort on the court at all times, a better decision maker, a leader, and hopefully transfer some of that impact that he had on a winning organization like the Celtics onto the Grizzlies. But here's the thing, so far this season, the Grizzlies have been much worse than expected, even with not having Morant, and that is in large part due to Marcus Smart. Look, no one said that the Grizzlies were going to be as good as they were last year, knowing that Ja was going to be missing nearly a third of the season and also losing Steven Adams to a season-ending injury. They weren't expected to be as good as they once were, although I shouldn't say everyone, because when I put out my Western Conference standings predictions and had the Grizzlies finishing 9th in the West, people went at me in the comments saying that I was crazy, and now it's looking like they might not even make the play-in at this point. But regardless, no one anticipated that in the early going in the season they would be this bad and struggling to string together easy wins against some of the worst teams in the NBA. Because even without Ja or Steven Adams, they still have Jaren Jackson Jr., an all-star last year, a Defensive Player of the Year winner, Desmond Bane, who got that fat contract extension, and an up-and-coming young player who continues to get better with every passing season, and then of course, now Marcus Smart. 2 elite-level defenders on the roster and an elite-level shooter in Desmond Bane. At a minimum, you would expect this to be an average team and not one of the worst teams in the league. Now, don't get me wrong, the lack of depth is a huge part of their early struggles. I mean, really, when you look at the rotation spots 1 through 10, it's pretty bleak outside of the top 3 in Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., Marcus Smart. A lot of young players who don't really have the skills and experience necessary to be truly impactful NBA players. So yes, this is a big reason why the Grizzlies have been so bad, because you're not going to be able to win very many games when Zaire Williams and Derrick Rose are your 4th and 5th leading scoring options. So you're just not. But despite the lack of depth, despite the huge loss of someone like Ja Morant, the loss of Dillon Brooks, which I cannot believe I'm saying, has been just as big. And a lot of this is because Marcus Smart really hasn't been making up the ground that they thought they would to replace Brooks with. Here's the thing. For someone like myself, who was one of the biggest Dillon Brooks critics, who took shots at the guy all last season, calling him a clown, a player who literally trash-talked his way to relevancy, and a player who more often than not shot the Grizzlies out of games and was terrible for them in the playoffs. Say what you will about Dillon Brooks, but he gave it his all when he was on the floor. He went all out whenever he stepped onto the court, sometimes to his downfall, unfortunately. But while the Grizzlies thought they were going to replace this with Marcus Smart and bringing in a higher IQ level player, a better all-around defender, and a better and smarter player on offense, that could not be further from the case. Marcus Smart, one of the big reasons he thrived in Boston is because he had such elite offensive players around him to mask some of his offensive deficiencies and enabled him to focus on what he does best in being a lockdown defender. Smart has really never been known for his shooting. He can shoot it, and he has no problem in getting up a bunch of threes, and every so often he'll heat up from behind the arc. He's really been inconsistent though throughout his career shooting from deep, shooting 32% from 3 for his career on nearly 5 attempts per game. For Smart, so far this season, he's having one of the most inefficient years since the early days of his career, shooting just 29% from 3 on over 6 attempts per game, a true shooting percentage of 53%, which is the lowest of his career since 2018, a negative 3.5 blocks plus minus, which is the worst of his career, and get this, per 100 possessions, when Smart is on the court, the team is a negative 17.1 when he is on versus when he's off, which is one of the worst in the entire league for qualifying players who have played at least 100 minutes so far this season. Now, yes, the Grizzlies are losing a lot of games, so naturally these negative numbers for when he's on the court are going to be high when the team overall isn't playing well. So then you think, okay, every player should have a net negative number for the Grizzlies like this when they're on the court because the team is losing most of their games. Not so fast though. While people like to criticize Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bane for the Grizzlies' poor start as the team's 2 primary scorers, unlike Marcus Smart though, they've been a net positive when they're on the court and playing the same amount of minutes as Marcus Smart. Jaren Jackson Jr. so far this season has a box plus minus of 3.1, Desmond Bane 2.6, positive numbers, despite the Grizzlies being 1-7 so far this season. And Marcus Smart averaging around the same amount of minutes, a negative 3.5. Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bane, their on-off numbers per 100 possessions are still a negative at 2.9 and 2.5 respectively, but Marcus Smart is a negative 17.1. That is a huge discrepancy in terms of their overall level of impact on the court. Marcus Smart, well, yes, he's leading the team in assists at 5.6 per game. He's also averaging nearly 4 turnovers a game, making that ratio moot in terms of being a positive impact as a point guard on the offensive end. Smart is one of the bottom 4 players in the league in turnover percentage relative to his usage. I mean, he's looked lost out there on offense at times, and he took an already poor 3-point shooting team to being an even worse shooting team, and a team that was in the upper half of taking care of the ball to one of the bottom 5 teams in the league in the number of turnovers they're committing. The Grizzlies are currently dead last in the NBA on offense by offensive rating and 27th in the league in points per game when they were top 10 last season. Now again, we might be blowing some of this out of proportion because you'd have to think that some of this will be fixed when Ja eventually does come back. You'd have to think their overall offense is going to improve. You'd have to think that with some of the offensive pressure being taken off Marcus Smart, that he'll be better positioned to get better looks and not being turning the ball over as much. But even still, by adding Smart, this does not make the Grizzlies a title contending team, which is what they're trying to achieve having one of the best young cores in the NBA. This team is trying to win now. That's been clear the last couple of seasons, and I hate to say it because I actually thought this would work out for them, but by bringing in Marcus Smart and giving up a first-round pick as well as Tyus Jones, who I still think is an underrated role player, giving that up for Smart is actually setting them back. Yes, they'll get Steven Adams back, Ja will be back, but even with guys being healthy, this team still isn't it, not with how stacked the Western Conference is. And so for the Grizzlies, additional moves are going to need to be made so as not to waste the prime of some of these younger players they have on their roster. I would love to hear what you guys think though in terms of the early going of the season for the Grizzlies. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.